Well, welcome everyone to our Building Trust and Encouraging More Planned Gifts webinar. My name is Jim Murphy. I'm the Managing Program Director at the Episcopal Church Foundation, and I'm so happy that you're able to join us either in person on September the 7th, 2016, or if you're listening to this webinar through our recording. It's wonderful to have you here tonight. I'm very happy to be joined by two of my esteemed colleagues, Ken Quigley, who is the Senior Program Director in charge of our Endowment Management Program, as well as Josh Anderson, the Assistant Program Director for Financial Resources. Josh will be taking care of all of our technical assistance tonight, and I'll be starting out our webinar, and Ken Quigley will be participating. And I'll introduce Ken in just a half second. So, just so that people know, if you don't know the Episcopal Church Foundation, we are an independent and lay-led organization. And we focus in on enhancing the leadership and financial capabilities of Episcopal congregations, dioceses, and other Episcopal institutions like camp and conference centers, schools, and all other types of Episcopal institutions to help you carry out the mission that God has called you to do in your own unique way. Many of you who are parishes are probably very familiar with many of our leadership resources, and many of those are available free of charge through our Vital Practices website, where we keep all of our recorded webinars. Many of you may be aware of our Vestry Resource Guide and other tools that we make available to empower leadership throughout the Episcopal Church. In addition, ECF helps Episcopal entities raise and manage financial resources for your current and future ministry. We do that in a number of different ways. Through capital campaigns where we can work with your parish, school, or other Episcopal entity on a sliding fee scale, so that if you have need for that very particular type of service to raise major gifts, you can work with ECF and we can help you through that sometimes very challenging process. ECF is also the main resource for planned giving in the Episcopal Church, and we are very proud to have been doing this for the last 21 years. ECF is also very happy to assist you in the area of endowment management, both in something we'll talk about in a few minutes, which are endowment and gift acceptance policies, but also in the management of endowment and other permanent funds you may have. Donor Advised Funds is a new program that ECF has recently established, and we're very happy to help your donors out there in this area. We are the first Donor Advised Fund that focuses primarily on the Episcopal Church, so we're very excited to be able to do that, as well as many other things that we can do to help your leadership enhance its capacity, including annual giving and stewardship and strategic resources. So the focus of our workshop this evening is on planned giving and building trust. Trust is a key factor when it comes to planned giving, and I'm going to explain what planned giving is in a moment. But I've often said that it is one of the most, if not the most, crucial factors to have in place to be able to demonstrate that the members of your congregation, the constituents at your Episcopal school or other entities, that you can prove to your constituents who give you donations of a variety of kinds that they can trust that you will hold those as good stewards of those gifts and put them to the use that they would have intended. This is a crucial factor in raising planned gifts, and if you are not able to demonstrate that your donors can trust you, you are going to have an incredibly hard time raising those types of gifts. And so Ken and I put this webinar together tonight so that we could focus in on this incredibly important factor of building trust There are a variety of ways that we will talk about with this. But first, let me just do a quick explanation of what planned giving is. Planned gifts are one of three types of gifts. They are not annual gifts. They are not capital gifts that you give toward a capital campaign. Planned gifts are gifts you make through your estate when you pass away, or out of assets that you're holding for retirement. There is an alternative description about what planned gifts are on your screen right now, and many of you who've been on our webinars in the past will already be familiar with this. And the key phrase in that description is the word personal values. When someone makes a planned gift to your congregation, your Episcopal school, or other entity, they raise you to the level of family in their estate plans, to the same place where their children and grandchildren are. This is a huge commitment that they are making to you and to your future mission and ministry. And it's imperative that you respond in appropriate ways to encourage people to trust you to make those kind of gifts. And you want to ensure that people know that if they do give you that kind of a gift, that it will be used for the purposes they would have intended. Now, there are several different factors to keep in mind when it comes to planned giving, and I will invite everyone on the webinar tonight to listen to one of the many webinars we have in place about the basics of planned giving, how to make a planned gift to your congregation, and many of the others that we have available on our ECF Vital Practices website. But I just want to highlight the main points when thinking about planned giving, and you'll hear many of these issues come up in what Ken is going to say and what I'll say a little bit later. Planned giving is different from the other types of gifts because it is truly future focused. It is a gift that is made typically after someone passes away. And as I said before, it's a great emotional commitment. It's a gift of passion and conviction in your parish or Episcopal entity's future mission and ministry. If you're going to be serious and move forward in encouraging people to make planned gifts to benefit your future mission and ministry, you need to always remember to be sensitive and gentle and patient. Planned giving is your ultimate long-term ministry, and you are seeking to build a relationship, not a quick fix with people. You are building a relationship with people over time so that you can build trust in a number of different ways so that individuals would be willing to make this sort of substantial commitment to your parish or Episcopal entity. Many of you are already aware of this, but I'll just say it again. Even though it is statistically proven that the number of planned gifts will be the smallest number of the type of gifts you'll receive. You receive a large number of annual gifts every year. If you run a capital campaign, you receive a smaller number of gifts within a capital campaign, though they are of a larger dollar amount. The smallest number of gifts you will receive will come from planned gifts. But that is perfectly okay because the people that are making the planned gifts are those that are most dedicated to the mission and ministry of your congregation or Episcopal entity. And those gifts, those smaller in number, will often be the largest gift that an individual will give to your congregation or Episcopal entity. And for all of these reasons, enhancing the ability to build trust among the members of your congregation or your various constituencies is crucial. One of the best ways for you to build trust is to put in place endowment and gift acceptance policies without a doubt. But there are a number of factors which go along with that. And I'm now going to turn the floor over to Ken Quigley, our Senior Program Director for Endowment Management, to talk to you for a little while about some of these aspects, about how you can build trust by enhancing what you're doing or not doing yet with endowments. Ken, please take it away.
All right, Jim. Thank you a lot. Building trust. I'm going to start off with what leads to a lack of trust in terms of planned giving, and then I'm going to talk about what leads to trust in planned giving. First of all, lacking an endowment fund. Churches that don't have an endowment fund tend not to receive legacy gifts. It's an axiom worth repeating. Churches that don't have an endowment fund tend not to receive legacy gifts. There was a call I had a couple of years ago now from a church in upstate New York, and a woman had come to the vestry and said to the vestry, "I received a large gift from a settlement from my sister who had recently died, and I want to make a gift to the church. But I want it to be there in perpetuity. How do I do that?" And the church called me and said, "You know what? We need to form an endowment fund in order to receive this gift." And I said, "Sure, we'll get that started." But what was odd about that was here you had a donor going to the church saying, "Please set up something so that I can give you a gift," whereas in most cases you want to have the church going to the donor asking for that gift. How are you going to invite people to make a legacy gift to your church if you can't also explain who's in charge of receiving that gift, who's going to manage it, how is it going to be invested, what's it going to be spent for, and how is it going to be protected over time? So lacking an endowment fund is one of the ways to discourage trust in what you're doing. Having no clearly defined purposes. Would you give your money to a cause not knowing how it's going to be used? No way. And you'll see your competitors will tell their donors what they're going to do with it. Let's go down the list. Your college and university is talking to you all the time. Your museum, the hospital, the Nature Conservancy are all asking your donors to consider making a gift to them to support their cause. You need to be clear about what the purpose is for your endowment fund. And if your endowment fund is strictly for operating needs of the parish, it's going to be hard to get excited about making a gift to an annual operating budget. It's not something more than what can be accomplished in the annual budget. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Failing to report on the use of funds. If the revenue derived from the endowment fund simply becomes a line item in the budget, which in many cases I've seen, you've lost your impact. You can't talk about what the endowment did for the church. One church that I met with did understand that principle, and they put up a plaque or a poster in the narthex, which I saw, and it said, "This past year, the endowment fund did the following things," and it listed all the things the endowment fund was used to do in that church for that year. It was a great way to underscore the importance of the endowment fund. You can lead to a lack of trust by overspending from your endowment fund. In order to overspend, you need to know what a prudent spending would be. And the goal of the endowment committee is to maintain the spending power of the endowment over time, considering inflation and fees. All right, so you're going to calculate a way to spend so as you spend only a portion of the fund to maintain the corpus over the long term. There's a law called UPMIFA, and write this one down, UPMIFA, the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, UPMIFA. It's been passed in 49 and 50 states. Only Pennsylvania, my own state, has not passed it, but it is a law that gives guidance with regard to the proper standards for investing and spending through endowments, and I'll explain that in a minute. And it encourages you to use what is called a total return spending policy over time so as to maintain the spending power of the endowment. That's what your role as endowment committee is, and particularly investment side of the committee, maintain the spending power of the endowment. So overspending will lead to a lack of trust. Disregarding donor intentions, this one is the heart and soul of it. If you accept a gift for the endowment fund from a donor, the donor has restrictions on what they want you to spend it for, and you spend it for something other than that, one, you're violating the law, first of all, of MIFA, and secondly, you are undercutting the moral authority of the committee, because you've told your congregation we're not respecting the wishes of the donor. It's a no-no. Don't ever do it. But there's also room for interpretation, and here's a story that I tell, where I had a call from a woman in a church in the Midwest, and she said, you know, I knew this person who gave a gift to the church in her will, who has now died, and it was intended for Christian education. And everybody knew that. It was for Christian education. And the rector, a new rector came, and he decided that he was going to spend that money or the revenue from that fund to pave the parking lot. And his rationale was, well, people have to park to come to church to go to Sunday school, so therefore paving the parking lot is related to Christian education. So you can imagine sort of the understanding of what the confidence level was at that church in the guidance of that rector in spending money for Christian education to pave a parking lot. Lacking a committee that a board with fiduciary responsibility. Somebody needs to be in charge of investing, receiving the money, spending the money, and it's important that the people that are involved in this activity are focused on the long-term assets of the church and the long-term vision of the church, and not responsible for the annual operating budget. And in the policies, we show we have a very written policy to separate those roles, so that the persons with responsibility for annual operating budget are not also making decisions regarding the long-term assets of the church. Another way to undermine trust would be to use the revenue solely for the operating budget of the parish. When the only purpose is to supplement the operating budget of the parish, you create a lot of problems. One, there's no real vision beyond the annual budget, that oftentimes it gets lost in the line item in the budget. There's no vision for what more could we do with the endowment fund. What happens in the year when the market goes down and you have less money to spend and you'll be tempted to spend more of the corpus. It's just not a good idea to rely on the annual operating and rely on the endowment for a large portion of your annual operating budget. And one example was a large church. It was a cathedral parish that had a very large endowment, probably 23 million, and they used that revenue from the endowment exclusively for the operating budget of the parish. And about 60-65% of the annual operating budget of the parish came from the endowment fund. And I talked to the rector, and he was bemoaning the fact that of all the churches in the diocese, his church had the lowest stewardship pledge rate, amount of pledge, of any church in the diocese, even though it was the cathedral parish. It shows you the impact that a large endowment, or the understanding of endowment as a crutch for the annual operating budget, can have an impact on annual stewardship. Sometimes it is necessary, and I understand that, and churches will not survive without revenue from the endowment fund. But there's that balance to catch as to how much and what would be the ideal situation. And I would say the ideal situation is to spend the endowment revenue for something other than the annual operating budget of the parish. So what builds donor trust? Let's try a couple of those ideas. Creating formal endowment structure and policies. Every church, no matter what your size, no matter if you have any money, of endowment money at all, you need to have an endowment fund policy or structure in place, because you're not going to be able to receive the money like that church in New York. They were unable to receive the money from that gift because they didn't have a structure in place. So step one in any effective plan giving program is establishing an endowment structure in order to receive these gifts. There was a church in Georgia that we worked with, Jim knows this church well, where they had no money, none at all. But it was like you build it and they will come. So they went ahead in faith and put together an endowment structure, put the policies in place, and had faith that something good was going to happen. And in order to invest through the Episcopal Church Foundation, you need at least $10,000 to start. And sure enough, as soon as they announced the program, they announced the structure of the endowment that was there, they got a $10,000 gift. And it wasn't long after that they got another $10,000 gift. And it was just great to see that church flourish and its endowment flourish, having no money at all, just saying we're going to create something and people will come, and by George, they did. So create the formal structure. And by the way, everybody who attends this seminar is going to receive a set of sample endowment policies and guidelines. These come as a Word document, and you can modify them to make it customized to your church and the policies or the purposes of your endowment at your church. We work with you. Oftentimes I'll review policies after the church has written them. But I strongly encourage you to take these documents and put them into use. Secondly, defining the purposes and understanding or clarifying the different types of endowment funds. I'm not going to go into great depth here. We did a whole seminar on this, and it really has to do with the difference between a true endowment and a quasi-endowment. And all I'm going to say at this point is a true endowment is if a donor gives you a gift for your endowment fund, or says, I want you to hold this gift in perpetuity, or spend income only. Those are all the ways that donor is telling you that I want this to be held in perpetuity. That gift is protected by the Upper Memphis state law. If, on the other hand, the vestry receives an unrestricted bequest to the church, or sells property, or has excess money and decides to put that in the endowment fund, that's called a quasi-endowment, and the state law has nothing to say about that at all. And whatever rules you have in place locally are going to have to protect the corpus of that, whereas state law will not protect the corpus of quasi, only true endowment. So understand there is a difference, and it's important to know the difference because ultimately it affects how you can spend from those two endowments. Professional investment manager. Investing money is complex business today, and you really need to have a professional do it. And if that professional happens to be a member of your congregation who offers to do it for free, that's not a good idea as well. I can tell you some horror stories of the local church being unhappy with the investment results and having to tell the individual that they wanted to change managers, and the fallout from that politically within the church was severe. So I do not recommend that. Having someone locally, someone in the parish, even though they're professional, manage the money of the church. You want an outside professional firm managing your money. You want to have an endowment committee. They have very distinct responsibilities. This is a fiduciary responsibility. These are people that are managing other people's money. And you have a fiduciary responsibility to the past, those that have given in the past. You want to protect the corpus, and to the future. That is encouraging new gifts to come into the endowment for future ministry of the church. Honoring donor and vestry constraints. As we talked about, that rector who used the money for the parking lot instead of the church, Christian education, you want to be very careful about honoring the donor restrictions. If you have received a gift and accepted it, you don't have to accept it, but if you've done that, you have to honor it, both legally and morally. If the vestry sets up a fund, and the vestry could do this, you can set up an endowment fund for Christian education, for youth, for capital needs, and if you set it up, then you need to honor that. And people will give to that fund with that understanding. 2 years from now, you can't say, well, you know, we really need that money from the endowment, the capital endowment to spend for Christian education, or vice versa. Not going to work. Both legally and morally, you've made a commitment. A better way to go at it, and we will put this in the policies, is you set up an endowment that will cover several purposes, and we'll say purposes such as capital needs, outreach, new ministry, and special one-time projects, so that the vestry at the time will have flexibility in how they spend the money. We also you also should be following, in order to build trust, you're going to follow prudent investment and spending policies. Again, MIFA will give you guidance as to what is considered prudent. And I encourage you to find the law on your state. Go to your Google and look up MIFA in California or MIFA in Virginia. And it will generally lead you to the document. And it's common across states. And it gives you guidance, gives the committee guidance on what is considered prudent investment, prudent spending. One particularly a bad example that really underscores the importance of having an investment policy in place. If you remember 2008, which I surely do, where a lot of money was lost in the market, as you know, it was one of the steepest declines since the Depression. We had a church that was invested about 80% in equities during that year, during 2007, 2008. In January of 2009, they came and said, you know, we can't take it anymore. We have to get out of equities. We're going to put all our money into cash in January 2009. And despite my protest, they did that. And so what happened was they rode the market all the way down, and out of fear, they sold at the bottom of the market, and they experienced none of the uptick of the market. As you know, in 2009, the market came roaring back. It was up 25% in some of the in the 50/50 account. So they missed out. They got all the down, and they missed out all the up. What an investment policy would do was not allow the church to make broad emotional decisions like that, but have a long-term strategic target to invest, controlling their investments. Finally, communicating about the use of the funds. The best marketing tool for your endowment is to spend money. Really, to spend money, but to tell people what you've done with it. Some churches, when they come in, they'll say, "Well, we're not going to spend any money from the endowment until we reach $100,000 because it's not that much. You know, it's not going to make that much of an impact. We spend, you know, right now the average expenditure is about 4% of a rolling 3-year average. So, say you have $10,000 to start with, you have $400 to spend. They say, well, that's nothing. So they say, we're not going to spend it until we get $50,000 or $100,000. I would say, by all means, no, wait, spend from the beginning. One, you will go through the practice of spending. Secondly, you will be able to market it through what you spend it for. Even if you spend $400, you can say, look what we did with the endowment last year. My advice to anybody at whatever level, spend money, but spend it prudently. Spending is one of your best advertisements for the importance of the endowment.
And before you go on, there is a question on the floor. You can answer it now, or if you'd like, we can answer it in a couple of slides when we officially pause. But would you like to answer Peter's question about what the pros and cons are of having the same person chair the finance and the endowment committee?
Well, yeah, I would say that it undercuts the principle of check and balance that we advocate. Because the chairman of the finance committee I would think, would be responsible for making sure the annual budget is balanced. Whereas the chair of the endowment committee is looking at the long-term investments of the parish, and the interests are not perfectly aligned. And I think it's important to have a check and balance where people are looking out and protecting the corpus of that endowment fund for the long term. And so it's not so easy to reach over when there's a shortfall in the annual budget and say, well, let's just spend out a little bit more money from the endowment fund this year because, well, you know, we really need it. We'll pay it back. So I would say, no, that's not a good practice. In the policies we offer, we'll say that the endowment committee could be comprised of 3 to 5 members appointed by the vestry, but none of the members would be members of the vestry. They would not be the treasurer. It would not be the senior warden. It would not be the rector. Would not be members of the committee, or they could be ex officio members with voice but not a vote. Yeah. Is the way that we set it up. That's intentional separation of interests.
And that's certainly an ideal. Ken, thanks. Why don't you go right ahead and continue on? And okay. For anybody else who does have questions, please feel free to type them into the chat message. We're going to have an official pause for questions in just a few minutes.
Right, and what I say is you need to create formal endowment structure and enact the operating policies. And as I said earlier, step one in any effective plan giving program, you have to have a way to receive these gifts that you're generating or encouraging. How are they going to be received? How they're going to be managed? How they're going to be spent? What are they going to be spent for? Who's in charge of making those decisions? That's all incorporated in these endowment policies, which we will send you. And here is the way they work. You have an enabling resolution, which is a resolution passed by the vestry, and you have 5 operating policies. And here are the documents which you will get as a Word document. But what the enabling resolution does, it sets up the ground rules. It establishes the purposes of the fund. And if you have multiple funds, sometimes you will have current existing trusts, or you'll have a fund that you're going to establish for a true endowment, a perpetual endowment, a permanent endowment, or you're going to have a general endowment that would be the quasi-endowment. People understand that giving to it, that ultimately the vestry could decide to spend more than the annual spending rule out of that one. You may have multiple couple of funds within the endowment. The endowment is like your umbrella through which you manage your long-term long-term assets. So it sets up the endowment, sets up the purposes, names the funds that are included within it, names who's going to be on the committee and what their responsibilities are. It determines the spending policy, which in the case we would recommend is the total return spending policy. That's recommended by UPMIFA. That would be as opposed to an income-only spending policy. And also how changes in the rules can be made. So the vestry establishes the broad structure of the endowment, sets up its purposes, and then names a committee who will then come up with the operating policies that will come back to the vestry to be ratified. And these policies would include, this is where you're getting more into the weeds of the operational activities. The endowment committee is going to take a look at the investment policy. That is, what level of risk are we willing to take? What would be the long-term strategy in terms of equities to fixed income? Are we going to be socially responsible in what we invest and how we invest? The investment policy establishes all of that. That's what you give to your investment advisor and say, this is how we want you to manage the money on our behalf. So the committee establishes that. Then you have a disposition of bequest policy. And this is speaking to when the church receives a bequest. Someone dies, comes to the church. And it says if the bequest is naming the endowment fund of the church, there's no question the money goes into the endowment fund. Pure and simple. However, if the bequest, it goes to the church by name, not to the endowment fund of the church, just to the church, that vestry can choose to spend all that money in that current year. They have, and the door is wide open as to what they can do. There's no restriction on that. They can spend it for whatever they want that year. They can spend it, they can put it in the endowment fund. What this policy says is the default position of the church is that all endowment funds will go into the endowment, all bequests, coming to the church will go into the endowment fund unless the rector and senior warden make a case for why it's important to spend some of that money or all of that money in the current year. Too often parishes get carried away with, oh, gee, we have a bonanza this year, we got a special request, now we can do this, we can do that, do the other thing, and whereas it might make more sense for them to take that money, put it in the endowment, and let it build the endowment so you have a long-term stream of revenue for future generations. So that's what that policy is. Donor-designated fund policy speaks to if a donor wants to restrict the purpose of the gift, they have to reach a minimum level. You don't want to have a lot of little gifts with restrictions, because once you accept a restricted gift for a particular purpose, you're stuck with it for now and forever. So you don't want to have the treasurer mad at you for trying to track all these little sub-funds. This says it's got to be a minimum. Then there's a gift acceptance policy, or spending rule. This defines in more detail the way you apply a total return spending rule. And in essence, it's like taking the average value of the fund over a period of 3 years, and you add a year and you take a year away, and you just keep the rolling average going forward. You take a percentage, and you look at what the markets are returning, you look at what other nonprofits are spending, and you come up with a recommended percentage. That is, the committee would determine, is it going to be 3%, is it going to be 4%, is it going to be 5% of that rolling average, and they make that recommendation then to the vestry. And then you have a gift acceptance policy. It gives guidance to the committee with regard to how to deal with or what questions to ask about non-cash gifts. How do you deal with a gift of life insurance or real estate or tangible goods? Just as a sequence of questions and suggestions for how to deal with non-cash gifts, because you certainly want to receive them if you can, and that's just good guidance to the committee. And finally, I don't have it on here, but in the policy you're going to see an appendix, Appendix A, and it's called Funds within the endowment fund. That is, it's going to define each one of the sub-funds that you've established, if you have more than one, and give the basic details about that fund so that you'll have a documentation of it. Too often people will establish a fund or a donor will give a gift and people forget, it's not written down somewhere. This is your collection point for those gifts, knowing where they came from, what the purpose was, who the donor was, what kind of gift it was, how you can spend from it. You have that recorded in this document. You keep that document on file, in a permanent file somewhere, so that the next generation will have an understanding of what the endowment's all about and where the gifts originally came from.
And I just want to emphasize how important that is, and it's for a number of reasons. You want to demonstrate, because you want to build trust among the members of your congregation, your other constituencies, that you can be trusted with the gifts that you've been given. If you're able to demonstrate that there is a particular purpose of a fund and you're using it for that purpose, that will always educate people. It educates them that you can be trusted with these funds. Additionally, the people whose relatives had originally given those funds enjoy being able to see that the funds were used for the purposes that they would have intended. And that, honestly, is what's known as good future donor relations, because you can encourage additional new gifts in the future by building trust with those who either are related to or greatly love the people that had made those gifts in the past. As I'll say in a few minutes, it's all about relationships and enhancing that relationship through trust. And I'll invite anyone who has questions now to please type them into the chat message, because this is a great opportunity to ask Ken or myself. But Ken is a fantastic resource for parishes and dioceses all throughout the country who deal with these really important issues when it comes to endowments and endowment policy. And I will just finally say on your last comment, Ken, because I think this is so important, I won't identify the diocese, but there was a very significant diocese with which we're familiar who had to spend a lot of money for a variety of things to uncover all of the purposes for the endowments which they held. It is crucial that people monitor that and have those things in place so that you're not only building trust and demonstrating how you're using it and therefore building further trust, but that you are just doing the right thing and the legal thing of spending those funds in the right way and tracking them as they are bound to be. There's a question from Kirk.
And let me answer that, Jim.
Go ahead, Ken.
Your point's well taken. I mean, I was a little bit harsh, I think, earlier when I said we have to keep that separation of powers. I was recently with a church, at, a very small church, that said, you know, we don't have the resources here. We don't have the people to have the two committees. I mean, people that are doing finance or doing the endowment. And I said, you know, we've got to be realistic, be practical about it. Yep. Yes, that's fine. You know what the goal is. Somehow internally you've got to separate in your minds. We have to protect the long-term interest of our long-term investors versus the short-term needs of the annual budget. But yes, you can, in a smaller parish, you're going to have crossover that won't be the ideal situation, but will be what is real. So yes, that certainly is part of it.
And you do the best that you can within your circumstances. Have the most separation that's possible, not always able to have all these separate individuals on separate committees, but you do the best that you can.
Yeah.
And that will go a long way to building trust among the congregation. There's another question, again from Peter, our friend out in the wonderful Diocese of Northern California. What's your recommendation on periodic reporting on endowment fund results? Very good question.
I'd say quarterly results are important. Tracking it on a quarterly basis is good. Report that to the vestry. I don't think you need to report to the full congregation every quarter, although they should be able to know if you have a report. You can post it somewhere. You want to have an annual report at the annual meeting for sure, and talk about the funds received, funds spent, what you spent it for. But in terms of the vestry getting a report from the endowment committee, you should be getting that kind of report from your investment advisor a statement of some sort every month, but you should get some sort of performance report every quarter. And that's what you want to be sharing with the vestry.
Thank you, Ken. I know other folks are typing, and we'll do our best to answer some questions a little later, but we want to proceed on with our webinar tonight. Ken, thank you so much for your insights, and feel free to either turn your video off or on and mute yourself as you wish for the rest of the webinar. There is one other, combining quarterly giving statements and info on planned giving. I think it's wise, as Ken said, to report quarterly to the vestry and annually to the congregation. If you do it more often, like monthly, it may be too much information, and it may also make people be a little overly sensitive to shifts in the market, whereas a quarterly accounting may actually be best. When it comes to info on planned giving, it depends what you're talking about, so I'm not sure. But let me answer some of these other questions, and if we don't answer your question, feel free to bring it up again toward the end. So to wrap up, we have just about 16 minutes left. What continues to build donor trust? In addition to all of these vital things that Ken has brought up, I have 4 items, and I'm going to touch on each of them as I try to wrap up tonight. The first being making people aware that they can give these gifts and what their options are. This is actually a very good trust-building exercise, because by sharing that information and making people aware of all of the different types of gifts, and again, you can listen to a different webinar on the different types of gifts and how you can raise awareness about different types. But letting people know all the different types allows people to feel like they're being treated like adults. What a radical idea, to treat people like adults when they come to church or are involved in an Episcopal charity. Make sure people know what types of gifts are available, because no one person will fit into any particular gift all the time. So let people know what their options are. I'll get a little bit deeper into this in a moment, but raising awareness over time without pressure. Planned giving is a very natural extension of your stewardship ministry. You are never to come across as pushy or aggressive when it comes to planned giving, but always come across as gentle and willing to be patient and take time. These are gifts that take individuals a long time to decide about. They need to decide which gift is right for them, and you want them to be notifying the members of their family, contacting appropriate professionals to help guide them through their choices so that they don't feel pressured. That also builds trust over the long term, because you are not demonstrating that all you are interested is the money. And that's really a part of the third item as well. When we're dealing with planned giving, people are raising your church, your school, or your Episcopal charity to the level of family in their estate plan. This is a true long-term relationship. And you have to demonstrate that you understand that it is about this long-term relationship. You need to thank people in appropriate cultural ways. you also need to demonstrate that it is not just about the money. I'm going to talk in a moment more about legacy societies, and the celebration through legacy societies and being able to thank people while they're alive in a legacy society is key. But let me just mention this now so I don't forget later. It can be dangerous sometimes to tie endowment giving too closely with the membership in the legacy society. Now, some parishes are able to accomplish this just fine. Generally, I would recommend that if you're just getting started with your legacy society, and I'll again talk about that in a moment, do not have people join the legacy society if they can either join by giving an endowment gift, a significant gift during their lifetime, or by giving a planned gift. You should focus your legacy society primarily on those individuals who are going to make a planned gift through their estate or assets that they're holding for retirement. If you tie your planned giving efforts too closely to simply building the endowment, you may cause a flip, this very delicate psychological switch to flip in people's minds, where they will not think that their gift is going to count as much as someone else who may be more visibly wealthy or more publicly wealthy. And the fact of the matter is, the major planned gifts will often come from those people that are unexpected and from those who no one would have thought of as a wealthy individual. So just please do bear that in mind, and I deal with this topic a little more deeply in our various webinars on legacy societies. But let me just say a few quick things on some of the other issues. And I know Ken has something. Ken, did you have something to say?
Jim, there was a question that I saw that speaks to what you're speaking to, was the best way to get a plan giving program launched. She said it doesn't seem to be like a campaign like the annual pledge. And
no, it's different.
But what I would say is, and he goes on to talk about the importance of the policies, and I would say that's exactly where to start. Is you start with putting in place the policies, because then you can begin to encourage people to consider a planned gift in relationship to what you've already established. And there's a different material we have that will, once you've established the endowment program, you can then talk about all the ways that you can give to that program.
Correct.
There are a whole slew of things you can start to do to begin to promote ways to consider a gift to the endowment fund, but it begins with that structural part.
I generally, as you know, do agree with you. I think they can happen at the same time, right at the beginning, of ensuring that you're building that sense of trust and confidence through doing the legacy, through putting in place those endowment and gift acceptance policies, absolutely. And at the same time, you can also be focusing on raising awareness of different types of gifts. And the reason you can do both at the same time and build upon the things that you've put in place with your endowment and gift acceptance policies is that it takes a long time to raise awareness about planned gifts, but this is a key step that goes hand in hand with it. You need to ensure that people know about all the different ways that they can make a gift, and in fact that they can make these kind of gifts to you. And it goes hand in hand. A problem, which many of you may already be aware of, is that there are over a million and a half charities in the country, and they're all of them trying to build trust with your constituents and convince people that they are more trustworthy to handle your planned gift. And unfortunately, if we don't put policies in place, if we don't raise awareness of all the different ways that people can make a planned gift and build trust through that educational process, we will lose planned gifts to other charities, even if someone has a great affection, an even stronger one for your parish. Now, how do we raise that awareness? There are a number of ways, and just as Ken was saying, they are on this list about the different policies that can be put in place and demonstrating that you're working with a trustworthy partner in investing those funds. You know, I have a prejudice that the Episcopal Church Foundation is a great place to come to invest those funds, but the fact that you're going and having a professional outsider help you with that investment process also helps build trust and confidence among the members of the congregation. But there are many resources that ECF can provide in addition to those endowment policies, to the investment, and helping your leaders directly is something that ECF has been focusing on for the past 2 decades when it comes to planned giving. Many of you are aware of some of our resources like Funding Future Ministry, like our Life Income Gift Program, or our sponsored websites like episcopalgifts.org. I'm going to focus in a moment on our main resource, which is Planned Giving on Demand in just a moment, but I have a great opportunity to say what I'm going to say next, which is about a donor-advised fund. Donor-advised fund is one of the fastest growing methods of philanthropy in the entire charitable universe today. The way they work is that an individual makes a gift now to a charity. And the charity that accepts the gift receives grant requests from that individual, and grants are made at another time later. And why these are so appealing to people is many people will be in a situation where they have a tax burden in one year and they would have a great commitment to a charity, and they make a gift to a donor-advised fund, receive the immediate tax deduction now, and decide later how to distribute that gift. That's why this gift is so popular, but it's appealing in a number of different ways. The Episcopal Church Foundation, I'm very happy to say, has created the first donor-advised fund that's primarily focused on Episcopal charities, and we have just rolled this program out. It focuses on the donor's needs, and if you're interested in learning more about the donor-advised fund, I will be sending a link to our website after this webinar, as well as letting you know that we have a webinar coming up on November the 15th, explaining everything about a donor-advised fund, and also talking about ECF's great new program, where the members of your congregation, your different constituencies at schools and camp and conference centers and otherwise, can actually participate for a low initial threshold of $2,500 and make gifts from that fund for the rest of their lives. But more to come on that in a future webinar. Very briefly, Planned Giving on Demand is our comprehensive resource for raising awareness about planned giving. It is intended for leaders to educate themselves at their own pace so that they can become what we call the planned giving shepherd, the main person in a congregation who will raise awareness to others and help keep this effort going. Many times the planned giving shepherd is the main trust bearer, the main person raising awareness of all the ways that people can make these gifts, and also someone encouraging the process of putting endowment and gift acceptance policies in place. So if you are not familiar with our Planned Giving on Demand, we'll also be sending a link to that, but that's our comprehensive resource with all of ECF's tools in one place, and we'll be sharing that with you after this webinar. So the main way your planned giving ministry builds trust among the members of your congregation and your constituency is being serious about it and playing for keeps, as I like to say, that you make a decision that you are going to keep your constituents informed about planned giving. You are going to ensure that you track if they tell you they've raised you to the level of family, and that you'll respond to inquiries, and that you will consistently say thank you in culturally appropriate ways. This consistency in keeping people informed, in keeping track, and continually saying thank you is the best way to build that relationship with your donors over the long term, and clearly to build trust, because then they can trust that you will treat them in an appropriate way. We have found that the best way to build trust over the long term and to give people the best insights to planned giving and how they can leave a planned gift is to create a legacy society at your congregation or with your Episcopal entity. ECF is happy to work with you directly on this, and we have a number of webinars which you can also listen to clarify how best to do this. However, the key factor here is that a legacy society allows you to stay connected with your donors. That after you create your inaugural event for your legacy society, that you, as a congregation, as an Episcopal entity, commit to saying thank you to your donors who've raised you to the level of family every year, consistently from this point onward. And the nature of a legacy society is that it is a group of people that have promised to make a planned gift to your congregation. You are not asking the dollar amount. In time, you will ask the type of gift, and we'll talk more about that in another webinar, but you are raising awareness constantly by virtue of having a legacy society, because anyone who has notified the parish or your Episcopal entity that they have made this type of a gift is invited to join the legacy society. And you open tremendous opportunities for the members of the legacy society to actually give their own testimony to others at the congregation and in many other instances to allow people to say why they have chosen to make this important decision in raising the parish or your Episcopal entity to the level of family. Now, as I say, we had to be a little short on these topics tonight, and there are other webinars for you to get deeper in and understand how to do a legacy society. But I will just strongly encourage you to contact ECF. You can contact me or Josh Anderson, and we are happy to work with you directly on creating this legacy society so that you can put in place this wonderful way of regularly saying thank you to those who've raised you to the level of family. Now, I know there was a question, and I wanted to end on time tonight. The best way to celebrate a legacy society, if you already have an endowment, is that, I'm not seeing the whole question. And yes. Okay, already have an endowment. So, I mean, Ken certainly can answer this question as well, but the fact that you already have an endowment, that is a wonderful opportunity to say thank you to those who are going to be making a planned gift as well, which will in all likelihood end up in the endowment. If you're asking the best way to celebrate them, typically within the context of a public event where you can say thank you publicly in a lovely dinner, a lovely cocktail hour based upon the particular cultural circumstances that your parish might have. But another factor in this, as you're rolling out your legacy society, if you're doing it for the first time, this is a key opportunity to also take some time as appropriate to raise awareness about ways to give current gifts to the endowment as well as future gifts through a planned gift. So it really just adds to your capacity to celebrate those people who have given gifts already, as well as encourage new gifts to come in the future. Ken, did you have another point? I know we've already gone over on time.
Just, Jim, what you said about the annual event, I've seen that work very effectively. I've attended a number of planned giving celebrations that honored those who were members of the society, and it was a great celebration at the parish, and people actually stood up and testified as to why they made the church the recipient of their legacy gift, and it was a very moving experience.
And that's talked about in some of the other webinars we have on legacy societies. I've been there too, and it's been just incredibly inspiring. And that's what moves people's hearts. If we go back to the beginning about what motivates people to make a planned gift, this is a very emotional decision. Stirring people's hearts are what you're trying to do, because what you're seeking is to demonstrate that the parish can be trusted with these gifts, and that through your efforts of saying thank you and allowing people to participate in something like a legacy society, you are allowing people to feel that they can be part of something greater than themselves and something which will endure. And this is just a fantastic way to encourage people to make these types of gifts to your congregation, and for it to help ensure the future mission and ministry of your congregation. So just to wrap up, we've gone over just a couple of minutes. There are a number of webinars which are available to you that you can view on our site as it's listed there, ECFVP for vitalpractices.org. We have some fantastic webinars coming out, including Ken's webinar on October the 19th on the basics of endowment, and on November the 15th, an overview of donor advised funds, which everyone will be invited to attend, and those, of course, will be recorded. Just to conclude tonight, thank you all for coming or for listening to this webinar as a recording. ECF is here to help you. You see part of our team up on the screen right now, but all of us are here to serve you, to support you in your mission and ministry, whether it be at a parish or an Episcopal school or some other Episcopal entity. Let us know how we can be of assistance to you to help you build up the resources to fund your future mission and ministry. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Ken, any final word?
Well, that's it, Jim. Thank you all.
All right. Everyone have a great night. God bless and enjoy. Good night.